Hi, everybody. This is Terry Art, President of Veteran Transition Publishing. Thank you again for joining us for our free video series. Today, I have a special guest with us, Dr. Eric Fretz. Eric, how are you doing today?
Doing just great. Good to see you.
Great. Well, so for those who are not familiar, Eric is the faculty lecturer at the University of Michigan. He's also the chairman for the Michigan Veteran Affairs Agency Region 9 Veterans Community Action Team. One thing I found interesting is when I was visiting with you on LinkedIn and connected that way, you have a tagline, helping students, veterans, and student veterans reach their full potential. That's awesome. That's a great cause. So with that, I know, Eric, we've talked extensively over the last few months. I know we connected originally when the program you're working with at the University of Michigan purchased a few of our books for some of your programming, but recently a lot stronger connection in the sense of your work with Dr. Nick Osborne. You guys connected at the recent conference, the Student Veterans Association conference, and started training some discussions about courses and programs, things of that nature. And that triggered this video, which we wanted to put together because you're doing some amazing things at the University of Michigan we wanted to highlight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. So we've talked extensively about your program. It started roughly about 5 years ago, correct?
Something like that. It's actually maybe a little longer, yeah.
Okay. But you're also doing work with other campuses across the country as well. So particularly as it relates to student veterans, so you also speak on some other topics at the college and teach other courses as well. So that was really at the forefront of the movement. I mean, when I've gone to student veteran conferences, say 5 years ago, there's like a handful of us that were there. Now it's growing and growing. So the fact that you've been doing this for a while says you've been striding. You may kind of trying to tell people, come on, follow me. I got the path here. So how'd this all come together? I'm curious, what triggered the start of this programming that you put together?
Sure. Well, I was actually a student veteran at the University of Michigan finishing my PhD. That got interrupted by my last mobilization to Iraq in 2008, and I came back in 2009 and finally finished the PhD. And then in 2010, after I'd graduated, in 2009 and 10, I was a member of the Student Veterans Association on campus at Michigan. So I'd basically sort of started actually as a student. And then when I transitioned out and became a faculty member, it was just sort of natural for me to sort of continue to hang around and support them. University of Michigan kept increasing its support of the SVA, so they hired some additional personnel. And so my role has always been sort of this informal, on the side guy who was, sort of former member who just didn't go away. And over time, it just became apparent that it would start simply as, oh, we want to do something about resumes and employment. And I said, well, I run a couple businesses. I've seen a few resumes in my time. Let me get another guy who I know who's another graduate who's local, and we'll do a resume class. And that went over really well. And then someone would say, well, we're struggling a little bit with finals. And well, I'm an educational psychologist, so I teach a sort of a learning how to learn class for the first year students at Michigan. Anyway, well, why don't I just teach it to the veterans and give you the basic kind of owner's manual for your brain, if you will. So how the best tactics are to study, things like that. And it just went on from there. Things like, oh, we've got some sort of stress issues. Well, we talk a little bit about this. We've got some military background in this. We can bring in some other experts. I also personally have a great deal of background in personal finance, and so they wanted to know a little bit more about retirement and managing their money. I said, well, I can teach you a finance class. And as these classes would happen largely informally, once or twice a semester as they saw fit or needed them to fit into their meeting schedule, it just sort of grew organically. And there was about probably 4 or 5 of them that we would do. And at some point, about 3 years ago or so, we formalized it to try and make a slightly larger course offering. I'll make it a sort of a more comprehensive package. We have some really great partners up here, the PAVE program, Peer Advisors for Veteran Education, and a number of others. And so we sort of traded some ideas, and I was sort of the person putting together the curriculum to sort of take it up a notch, formalize it, add some actual activities, just make it a little more of a formal package. And that's what we've been using since then. And I continue to kind of tweak and tune that. And so I provided these same modules to other campuses locally, like the Washington Community College, and periodically the There's a really great program run by Ross Bryan out at UNLV, and he's occasionally had me come out to teach these same modules as part of their orientation. Kind of ebbs and flows based on their funding availability and the structure. Right, they're a very large program, but that's great. You can get out there and be in a room with 200 incoming vets and really get down to brass tacks about here are all the things that are really going to help you in your first year, and they really like it.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. As you brought up his program, as the any industry, there's usually this tight-knit group of connectivity, yourself, the program UNLV, Nick's over at University of Illinois, Jamie Richards at Purdue. I mean, you start getting these people are really starting to making some headway. And it's a partnership. You guys are working together and sharing best practices and whatnot, which is one of the reasons to put this video together. Because, following us, we have a viewer base of someone who's just got literally a desk outside their office, right, and that's their veteran center, and they're just like they're anxious to get going and trying to figure this out. To programs like yours, where it's like, hey, I'm interested what they're doing at UNLV or Purdue or University of Illinois, so I can pull in some of those data. So let's talk about your course specifically. You mentioned developing over time. Right now, you have the latest syllabi or outline that you kind of put together has 10 different modules to it. Each are designed, around this 90 to 120 minute segment. And this is like 60 minutes of instruction, some activity, and then some additional instruction if it's necessary. 2 or 3 of these put into a full day, so like an orientation, I suppose, a component, and then every couple weeks. And so you build it beginning of a semester and kind of wrap up before kind of finals period, and then you kind of start up again. So did I get all that kind of highlighted correctly?
Sure. There's actually no real requirement to package it in any particular way. So it's all kinds of things. We primarily now we've in Michigan, we've sort of gone to a system now where I sort of teach a class every other week at the request of the SVA based on what they're most interested in. So they can just kind of choose. Obviously they're my home site, so I'll just do whatever they ask me to do, I'll do it, and then if it's something like, when somebody wants to fly me out and participate in the orientation. So for example, at UNLV, it would be something like, okay, out of your 10 modules, we want you to do these 5. So we want you to start at, 11 o'clock and teach until 5 or 6. And usually it runs after. Typically the vets are sticking around. That's why you really know you're getting something done when the vets are still there at 5 o'clock in the evening, it's 1700, and they're still there asking questions, that you got them. So, so it really can be done flexibly any way you want. The longer format, the 2-hour format with the activities, we don't often do that just because there's always that sort of perception of kind of time and value. And so even though we designed all those activities, those have never been the strongest portion. They're certainly available. And if you have if you have a local mentoring program where you have additional folks that want to do activities or follow up on it after the class, that's typically when those are done. But they're built into the curriculum. It's just the main feature is mostly an interactive recitation type lecture with me and the slides and the veterans kind of moving throughout the room, really getting them engaged.
Okay. So is this a formal class that they sign up for at the semester level at Michigan?
We've tried, I think a lot of places understand, and anybody who's tried to do this understands the difficulty. When you're trying to make a dedicated course, you have these huge hurdles. I mean, first and foremost is your institution itself. Who hosts the course? Do you even have a place where these sorts of small 1-credit courses can be developed? Lots of places do, but there's a curriculum board. There's a lot of players involved, right? There's issues of who gets the credit and how is this done and who pays for it. And then there's the additional question of how does it fit into somebody's degree? What if you just make it as kind of a 1-credit that isn't particularly tied to any department, it's very hard to tie it to somebody's major. And then, if they're really concerned about using all their credits correctly for GI Bill, that's a problem. So there's a lot of difficulty, right? I mean, it's for the institutions that are able to create a 4-credit course that does this. I'm really impressed because we got a little frustrated by it. So we just run it informally. So we basically, our conduit is that we deliver this stuff voluntarily through the structure of our SVA. And so that gets us access to 30-40% of the vets on campus. It's a pretty strong draw. It's pretty well received. So that's the real focus, basically. Our solution was to do it voluntarily and just basically offer it in about a 1 to 2 hour format in the evenings with free pizza, and we get a pretty strong response. There's definitely a strong, once they've been to a couple of modules, they kind of buy in and they're like, okay, I'm coming for the next one because I wasn't sure about this one, but it really paid off for me. So I'm just going to come to all of them.
So in your situation then, since it's really been more SVA kind of driven, with the request of like, hey, we're seeing some requests for this, or hey, do you have information that might help us with, resume development, things of that nature. A lot of our viewers, the common thing, and you've probably seen it when you gone to conferences too, which is about participation, right? How to get, hey, I'm putting on this event, and then like 2 students show up, right? Yeah. It sounds like you've gone beyond that. And now it's kind of more of a grassroots momentum. It's like, oh, hey, Dr. Fretz is putting together another program, and people I'll talk about, and students show up.
Sure. Yeah. Like just recently, they had always, we had one module that was on something called emotional intelligence and degreening. And I teach a graduate class in emotional intelligence and self-awareness. That's basically sort of interpersonal skills, right? And that's been going really well. And so we decided to break out some of that grad school content into a dedicated module, expanded version, basically, of emotional intelligence. So we kind of threw that out there to see who would show up. And I got a smaller room, and we ended up, packing the whole room with like 24 people. And so it went really well, and they really ate it up. So it's just another example of how I'm continue to try and involve these modules to sort of give the vets what they need, the tools that they need to basically be really successful both in school and then, of course, the graduation. I mean, even at a 4-year institution like Michigan, we get a lot of vets doing the transfer thing. So we usually see them for 2.5 years on average, right? And so basically you come in, you get 1 year's worth of modules, and maybe you see some repeats in your second year, and then all of a sudden it's time to graduate. So
awesome. So with that, so the you mentioned the modules. And so I wanted to highlight, these 10 modules that kind of established now. You mentioned the newer one that you've introduced, the emotional intelligence and self-awareness, and the response you've gotten from the students on that one. Another one that's coming up that you mentioned those requests for is on leadership.
Sure.
And then you got academic readiness, success, the finance, career, resources like the VA, emotional wellness, healthcare, things of that nature. And then people skills, the degreening you mentioned just a moment ago. So when you started with it, I think you've already answered this, but it's really more student or faculty, component mentor driven. Was there any other components that brought this all together to create those 10?
We really just asked the question amongst the people that were kind of involved and all the partners. We sort of said, what do we know anecdotally, and what does the research show are the things that derail student veterans' progress? And so, we looked at how many of them go on academic probation or get so frustrated with imposter syndrome or other things that they give up, right? That affects the completion rates. So how can we give them the tools to do well and stay up to speed in their first term? So the academic readiness has basically 2 different modules. So the academic readiness is one topic, but there's actually 2 modules for that. And we cover all kinds of things from study skills to basic learning theories, simple things like why cramming is such a bad idea. I mean, everybody kind of understands cramming is a bad idea. I give you the psychological science behind it, and I really hammer it home, trying to make sure that basically you realize that if you're cramming right at the end before a test, you should kind of be ashamed. You kind of let it get away from you, and that basically I also make the time argument that if you study 6 times for a half hour each for a total of 3 hours, or you study 6 hours right before the test, the 6 half hours spread out over time will beat the 6 hours right before the test every time. So if you can adopt this system, you actually end up having more time to do other stuff. You just got to have the discipline. And most vets, when you put it that way, they kind of get it, and they're willing to kind of adapt their habits. So there's a whole host of those things that we cover in academic readiness. Even just something as simple as imposter syndrome. I didn't realize how strongly this would resonate, but just the idea that we know that lots of people sit there and think, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be here. It was a mistake. They're going to find out that I don't belong here. And everybody sort of suffers that in silence and thinks it's just them. And when I go ahead and just point at the elephant in the room and everybody looks around, it's like, oh yeah, I feel that way. And I tell them that I felt that way in grad school. And then they realize that it's actually just a normal thing, then that has much less power over them. So just even something as simple as that, I've gotten consistent feedback over the years folks that were graduating who just said that was one of the things that resonated with them, was just to hear somebody explain that and depower that in their mind was so helpful to them. So all sorts of things like that in academic readiness. And then finance is also split into 2 modules. Career prep is split into 2 modules. We cover things like resumes and interviewing and all those sort of key aspects, power of internships and all the different programs that you can use to get additional experience. So yeah, all those things are pretty valuable. They all were things that basically would tend to interfere with the progress towards degree and career. And so we designed all these modules to specifically attack and sort of preemptively train them up and sort of vaccinate them against these risk factors, basically.
Gotcha. I'm curious, are there, out of those modules that you've done where you've done some research or you've seen some of the stats behind what these student veterans are experiencing, you create a module where maybe they didn't think it was going to be that great, but they walk out of it like, wow, is there one in particular that kind of resonates with you that you remember that being super impactful for the students?
I think by far all of them tend to be very highly rated. We scored them for many years. I got so tired of my paperwork I don't do this anymore. But we would score them, and it was nice. We would ask them this question on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being absolutely every veteran should take this class. We were pulling numbers historically of 4.8, 4.85. So it was really strong response just in general to the classes, which was great. I think that a lot of them feel that sometimes the health ones where we're talking about sleep and alcohol and tobacco, they're so used to having just horrible death by PowerPoint experiences with very preachy stuff from the military on those. And that's totally the opposite of what I do, right? I make this much more interactive, and we really get down into brass tacks, and I really put the reality up to their face, right? To kind of talk about some of these things and get them to really think about the different things they were taught in the military and what's normal for them versus what's normal for school versus what's normal for sort of regular civilians. We use the phrase a lot in my classes, never go full vet. And so that's their little joke they say, sometimes say it. Just sort of learning how to how to fit in, to comport yourself now to this new culture that you're in. So that one, I think a lot of times they feel like it's going to be, oh dear, and they end up really enjoying it. That's one. And then the other one that gets the strongest response is the finance. I mean, it's one of those things where people have such a gap of knowledge, and yet they know that they need it. And so this class is really fun, really kind of eye-opening. It really hammers home the power of the time value of money. And it really gives them, for the first time, a vision of, oh, if I just do a couple of simple things repetitively with discipline for 30 years, I'll actually end up in a really good spot. And here's this cool chart that Dr. Fretz has showed me where the math is just right there. It makes it really plain. That gets a really strong reaction. That's really our highest rated class.
Awesome. Okay. So when you do these modules or, put together a course, like the career or the finance, obviously there's some very basic fundamentals that, we can all speak to, in our scenarios with these students. But are you also leveraging, the Career Center or a financial, advisor or other resources too that you'll bring in to kind of be that, second party? It's like, hey, not only am I talking about it, there's someone else that can validate that this is true.
Interesting. We do bring in some of those resources in other meetings. So we will bring in the career services at a different meeting, but not during the class necessarily. The class is generally designed to stand alone, and each one of them is relative. That's one of the things that's nice about the course is that, it's a unique course in the sense that a long time ago, we had this vision that maybe we were going to create the course as kind of like a thing where we did train the trainer, and we tried to have this kind of propagate with other trainers. And what happened was, I guess, because I'm the curriculum designer for it and I have this specific background, it was kind of tailored to my background. So the fact that I was retired after 20 years, that I had served as a commissioned officer, but had also been worked with every different branch of service and a bunch of joint assignments. So I had a really broad awareness. I'd served for a year with the Army in Iraq and all this. So I had a really good cultural awareness of all the services. Had a long tenured, successfully retired, had worked in both corporate and military and academic teaching settings, right? And had worked as an entrepreneur and had a lot of background in finance, and then had the dual PhD in education and psychology. All of these things came together to sort of give me this really great tool belt that kind of fit all of these problems, right? And so what's nice about it is that, during the classes, you're not having a well-intentioned educator reading from somebody else's curriculum. You're actually, like with me, it's literally I created it and I have all the background so that if they want to push deeper and really get more into the detail, I'm ready to go right down the rabbit hole if they need to. So in that sense, it's we don't bring in a lot of exterior resources because the courses are really only designed around areas where I have pretty solid expertise. And actually, just the other day, I get this a lot where we'll bring in the other experts, and what's so fun about it is that the people will start telling their version of things, right? And the vet will turn around to look at me. Just last night, he's like, "That's what you say." I'm like, "See, good, right?" So there is a nice synergy there, but we don't go for that in the class itself. But yeah, definitely.
So with that, you mentioned, the resources and bringing them in on a separate point, but I know, we've worked together and prior to this, using some of our publications, which is great. You reference that as an additional resource.
Oh yeah, shameless plugs right here.
There you go. Nice. So are you requesting them like read, like the chapters or modules out of our things and other places to prep them for this? Or is it more, hey, here's my presentation, here's the topic on this, and then, hey, here's some additional things you can go out and
It's mostly along the lines of additional resources for them to explore. I think it's a real challenge, that we want, for example, we had the extra activities in the modules, right? That it was a little bit of an uphill slog to get them to gauge that. Same thing with doing any kind of pre-readings. They're already quite busy with all their other courses. And so the more you start to make this like here's the course, you've got to do readings and we're going to have a discussion and there's going to be a quiz. That's an interesting dynamic to add that we've sort of stayed away from. But we definitely, like I said, we do purchase the books and we give out complimentary copies and we point them towards this as a resource because it's nice because it goes so much more in depth, right? I mean, basically, almost all the things that I talk about in the different modules are reflected in some way, right? In this in Life During College, right? You can go and find additional sort of pieces in there, so it's a really nice complement. Yeah.
Good. Now, you mentioned, the dynamic of you and this vision that you had for the course, and you're presenting the module, but you also record them and have done that in the past. And, in your looking through the documents you sent to me on it, you mentioned it's like, hey, here's something so that a mentor could, potentially watch and be reminded of some of the topics. So when they're working with a student veteran, they can refer back to it. But are you seeing other ways that these recordings could be utilized?
Yeah, we haven't recorded all the classes. And so when we were initially talking about this idea of like having a train the trainer thing or whatever, that could be useful. And the actual takeaway, the handouts and the activities would definitely be good for mentors. But yeah, one of the things we're thinking about now is actually breaking into smaller chunks and to improve the reach, right? Because one of the things, of course, is if I'm local on campus and it's a known routine there, but there's for a way for me to kind of basically have a bigger impact would be to take some of these topics and condense them down into maybe small 5 or 10 minute chunks. So that's something we're considering now, basically making smaller, really focused topics. For example, breaking out some of the health and wellness stuff and just saying, here's a 5 to 10 minute video on sleeping and caffeine. And I would kind of lay down all the law about that stuff and really get them thinking about how are they sleeping, how well are they sleeping, how are they using caffeine, what is that really doing to them sort of physiologically and brain chemistry wise, what does it mean when they have to have 3 cups of coffee to start their day, and talk about how to maybe do a detox and the benefits, right, couched in the arguments of how this will make you a better student. And I think that might be an effective way to start getting that message out more broadly, right? So that's something I'm considering, and if we can get a sort of, if there's a groundswell of interest in that, that's definitely doable. Good.
So you mentioned, work with UNLV, and I know you've connected with other people at conferences and whatnot. How can you mentioned the orientation? Are you also doing other programs at UNLV or other campuses as well that people have brought you in for?
Primarily, UNLV has been the big one, right?
Mhm.
I've had a lot of discussions with local universities around here in Michigan. They working on. There's a lot of folks that have had a lot of discussion as they're developing their own programs, right? Because it's an interesting question of do you want to do your own or get some help doing your own or sort of bring somebody in, and so it's initially it's a bit of a challenge. You know, once you see the course in action and get the strong response from the veterans, it becomes oh wow, this is a compelling value. But early on, it's always a challenge to both make the argument of like, why do we want to fly somebody in if we can kind of do our own thing, which is always a strong incentive for people. And then of course, as you mentioned, it happens, for example, when I would go say next door to Washington Community College, initially it would just be a couple of, like, say, hey, we're going to have this class. Well, of course, they feel like, well, I'm already in class all the time. And, oh, there's this guy who's going to teach us about stuff. And then, of course, the three that show up, they all then, oh, that's amazing. When can you come back? Right. And so then they'll tell two friends. So you sort of build that up over time. So that's where I think also that's another way I think that the videos could be powerful because they're smaller chunks of time and you could almost sort of binge watch them if you want, or just serialize them. Right. And so I think that might be an effective way to capture some of the lightning in a bottle kind of thing and share it more widely.
Yeah. Or as a prep for you coming to visit, right? So it's like, hey, we're going to have this gentleman come in and speak on X, and hey, as a precursor, here's 3 5-minute videos on just some of the topics that he's talked about that so they get a sense of like what they're going to be coming into and what's there. So they see some value there. So I was going to expand on this a little bit because if someone did want to, said, hey, I'm just getting started and I'm not sure really how to get this, but SVAs, we're getting stronger. They want to have you on campus. That could be kind of a precursor of like, reach out to you, and we're going to have information at the end of this about how to get a hold of you if there is interest in that. But, partnering with that program's SVA and say, hey, get the word out. Here's some, pre-information you can help get it promoted so that when you do show up, there hopefully is more than 2 students. But, to kind of help with that momentum. I'm curious, so what's your passion behind this? What's the goal that you're trying to get to? Because this sounds like it's outside of your scope as a faculty member there at the university.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it is. I think the bottom line for me is once I got through my last deployment, struggled a little bit with that coming back and degreening, getting back into the student mode, and graduating. It just really became apparent to me that there was an awful lot of vets who could use an awful lot of assistance, right? It was one of these things that sort of became a passion of mine to say, helping other veterans actually sort of helped me feel better and actually got me on my feet. And I thought, there's all these needs. There's all these vets who are trying to come back to college and really make something of themselves. And there's all these factors that are sort of hindering them. And when I was on active duty, I always viewed the purpose of my commission as like a sword or a tool that I would use to go out and chop down the things that were in the way of my people so that they could kick butt and do whatever they needed to do, right? My use as a leader was simply to push things out of the way so that they could reach their full potential. And so I realized after I retired that I actually didn't have to stop doing that I actually can be a faculty member, and I have all of these veterans here on campus, and I'm also involved in the Veterans Treatment Court, and I'm also involved in the VCAT, where there's all kinds of veterans who need all kinds of help. And so I actually still have my tribe, and I want them to come in and be part of the vet tribe again and feel like they belong, and then have access to these resources, whether I provide them or somebody else provides them. It's really, for me, it's kind of a continuation of service. For me, I think I can't imagine a point in my life where I'm not going to want to do this. Because like I said, I've already retired and I work at the university and I teach full time, but I just do a variety of courses that they ask me to do. Not particularly huge money in that, but there's a lot of enjoyment. I get to have a lot of impact on a lot of students. And so that's really become my thing. I really like teaching and sharing this information so that folks can really get where they want to go. So that's my passion.
Awesome. That's great. I want to open this up because the component, next card is really just, for those viewing, because we do have a wide range of people who, different stages in their programming. If someone does want to reach out, connect with you about your modules, your programming, these videos that you're going to be putting together, what piece of advice do you have for them, and how can they get a hold of you?
Sure. Well, I would say the piece of advice would be, the number one thing is you have to kind of hunker down and really just put energy into it over a period of time. That you don't hatch a vibrant SVA program, you don't hatch a vibrant mentoring program, or any of these things instantaneously. It's not a 1 semester or a 1 year play, right? This is something that has to grow organically over time, and it grows with the result of investment of time and effort and resources. Because University of Michigan now has a large SVA that over the last couple of years has had as many as sort of 50 people at a meeting, and that's on a campus that only has 120 vets. So that kind of participation is relatively intense, but that's built up over time and through a whole lot of interactive factors. I mean, when I was in 2009 and I was finishing my PhD, I was sitting at a table with 3 other vets, staring at each other, right, arguing over who had to be vice president next term, and having were we going to have a meeting this next month or not, kind of thing. It was a much more modest, minimalist setup, right? And over time it grows. So that would be one thing. And then to get in touch with me, just ebfretz@umich.edu, and I'll send you some other information we can maybe provide, so folks can sign up if they're interested in learning more. I'm always happy to help and talk. I love spreading this information. I'm perfectly happy to, if folks are really interested and want to. My offer has always been, if you want to try this out, your first class is free, kind of thing, right? So if you're really interested, you want to set up some sort of a remote video chat kind of thing where you get your vets together and we kind of have an open discussion. I'm all about that. It's the more vets I can help, the better. So that's where I'm at. Yeah.
Good. Well, I certainly appreciate your time in giving us this education, but I hope that everybody watching this video takes advantage of this. When we find people like Eric, they're doing things out of their heart to help a better student and other veterans with their transition. This is pure. I've talked to Eric several times about this. He's been well connected within the industry. So you're not going to go down the wrong path with Eric. So for those who want to learn more, I want to have his contact information here on the program. So stick around. You'll be able to see that here shortly afterwards, or feel free to just email me at info@veterantransitionpublishing.com, and I'll be able to get you the contact information as well. And certainly please share this video with your peers, your colleagues, and get the word out about his programming and the resources that are available. And certainly if you want to learn anything about our Veteran Transition Publishing services, please visit us at veterantransitionpublishing.com. Again, Eric, thank you very much. I appreciate having us here today and taking a break from your sunshine there to join us on this video.
Awesome. All right. Have a good one.